The diplomatic halls of the Alarian Empire's capital station were vast, lined with towering silver columns that shimmered under the artificial light. The air smelled faintly of something floral, though no visible flowers adorned the room. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as Captain Daniel Carter stood near the grand observation window, staring out into the endless stretch of space. This was the last day of the peace negotiations between Earth and the Alarians. After decades of war, both sides had finally decided to put down their weapons. The cost had been high, thousands of lives lost, entire colonies destroyed. But the future now held hope. Daniel should have been relieved. Instead, his heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her. Princess Celia. She was unlike any being he had ever met. Her silver skin shimmered like liquid metal, her sapphire blue eyes holding an unreadable depth. Alarians were tall and graceful, their movements smooth like flowing water. And Celia, she was royalty, the daughter of the Alarian High King. To humans, she looked almost like a goddess. Daniel had met her 2 years ago, when the first peace talks had begun. At first, they were just representatives of their people, exchanging cold, formal words. But over time, something changed. Small conversations turned into long discussions. She would ask about Earth, and he would ask about Alaria. He made her laugh, something he later learned was rare for her kind. And somewhere along the way, Daniel had fallen in love. But love between a human and an Alarian was unheard of. They were different, too different. The war had made their people see each other as enemies, not partners. If anyone found out how he felt, it could destroy everything. Yet, he could not hold it in any longer. The doors behind him slid open with a soft hum. He turned, and there she was. Princess Celia entered the chamber with her usual elegance, dressed in a flowing dark blue robe lined with silver embroidery. Her glowing markings shifted subtly, a sign of her emotions. Daniel had learned to read them. Right now, she was calm but curious. "You asked to speak with me alone, Captain Carter," she said, tilting her head slightly. Daniel swallowed hard. He had faced battleships, stood against enemy commanders, and made life-or-death decisions, but nothing had ever been as terrifying as this moment. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need to tell you something important." She stepped closer, the dim light reflecting off her skin. "Go on." He took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. "I have loved you for years," he said. For a moment, there was silence. The kind that stretches so long, you begin to doubt reality itself. Then her sapphire eyes widened. Her glowing markings flickered rapidly. Shock. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Had he made a mistake? Celia took another step forward, her gaze locked onto his. Slowly, she raised a hand and placed it over his heart. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver through him. "You do not understand what you have done," she whispered. Her voice was softer than he had ever heard before. There was no anger in it, no disgust, only something deep and unreadable. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Celia hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Alarians do not love the way humans do," she finally said. "For us, love is not a passing feeling. It is a bond. Once acknowledged, it cannot be undone." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Are you saying my words created a bond?" She shook her head. "No, the bond was already there." Her voice grew even softer. "But by speaking it aloud, you have awakened it." He was stunned. He had only wanted to be honest, to tell her what had been in his heart for so long. He had never expected this. Celia closed her eyes briefly, as if feeling something invisible between them. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. "You have altered my existence, Daniel Carter," she said. "And now, I must decide what to do about it." Daniel had thought confessing his love would be the hardest part. But now, as he stood before the alien princess, Watching the flickering lights of her markings reflect the turmoil within her, he realized. This was only the beginning. The silence between them felt heavier than the vastness of space outside the observation window. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs as he watched Celia process his words. Her glowing markings shimmered erratically, flashing from deep blue to silver and back, a sign of emotional turbulence. "I don't understand," Daniel finally said, his voice quieter than before. "How can words change anything?" Celia slowly withdrew her hand from his chest, but even as she stepped back, he could still feel the warmth of her touch lingering on his skin. She clasped her hands together, a rare sign of unease. "Illyrians do not experience love the way humans do," she said. "For us, it is not an emotion that fades or grows over time. It is a force, an unbreakable connection." Daniel frowned. "A bond." She nodded. "Yes, Illyrian bonds are rare. They do not happen by choice. They are ancient, something deeper than conscious thought. But they remain dormant unless acknowledged." Her sapphire eyes locked onto his, intense and searching. "Your words, Daniel, have awakened it." His breath hitched. He had only wanted to be honest, to let her know what had been weighing on his heart for so long. But he had never expected this. Celia took another step back, as if putting distance between them would somehow undo what had just happened. "You do not realize what you have done," she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. "Then tell me." Celia exhaled, her glowing markings settling into a soft silver hue. Once an Illyrian acknowledges a bond, it is irreversible. The weight of her words crashed down on him. He had thought love was something that could be accepted or rejected, that she could simply tell him she didn't feel the same way, and that would be the end of it. But this was something else entirely. "What does that mean for you?" he asked. Celia hesitated, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her robe. "It means that I can feel it now. Your presence, your emotions." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And if we are separated for too long, it will hurt." A cold realization settled in Daniel's chest. "You're saying, if I leave, you'll feel pain." She nodded. "It will begin as an ache, a longing. But over time, it will become unbearable." Daniel's mind raced. This was impossible. How could something like this happen just from speaking his feelings aloud? It didn't make sense. At least, not in the way humans understood love. Celia turned toward the window, gazing out into the endless stars. "For centuries, our people believed that bonds only existed between Illyrians, that no other species could ever form such a connection with us." She turned back to face him. "You have proven them wrong." Daniel let out a shaky breath. "And what does that mean for us?" For the first time, she looked uncertain. "I do not know," she admitted. "But this is dangerous, Daniel. If the High Council learns of this, they will not understand. They will see it as a threat." "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why would they care?" "Because Illyrian bonds are sacred. They are meant to unite, to strengthen. If an Illyrian bonds with a human, it means our species are more compatible than we ever imagined." Her expression darkened. "It will change everything." Daniel hadn't expected love to have such deep consequences, but now it wasn't just about them. It was about the future of both their species. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Celia studied him for a long moment before she spoke. "We keep this secret. For now." Daniel hesitated. He had spent years as a soldier, following orders, doing what was expected of him. But this was different. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Celia's gaze softened. "Then you will be hunted. By my people. And possibly by yours." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. He had spent years fighting in a war that had cost too many lives. Now, even in peace, there were still battles to fight. Only this time, the battlefield was unseen, and the stakes were personal. His feelings for Celia had always felt impossible, but now he realized just how dangerous they truly were. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. Then we keep it a secret. Celia's markings flickered, and for the first time since his confession, she relaxed slightly. Thank you. But as Daniel looked at her, standing before him with the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders, he knew one thing for certain. This secret would not stay hidden for long. Daniel sat in his quarters aboard the Terran diplomatic cruiser, staring at the dark metal walls. His hands were clenched into fists, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He had confessed his love to Princess Celia, and now she was bonded to him. Alarians did not love the way humans did. Love was not a choice for them. It was a permanent, unbreakable connection. And because he had spoken his feelings aloud, he had triggered something ancient within her. Now, if they were separated for too long, she would suffer. A part of him still struggled to believe it. It sounded like something out of a legend, not real life. But when he had looked into Celia's sapphire eyes, he had seen the truth. She was bound to him. And there was nothing they could do to change that. A sharp knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. The door slid open, and Lieutenant Rourke stepped inside. She was one of his most trusted officers, sharp, professional, and always serious. Her blonde hair was tied back, her uniform neat as ever. "Sir," she said, her voice low, "you should see this." Daniel stood up, following her down the corridor. The cruiser was silent, most of the crew still asleep. It was late, but something about Rourke's expression made his chest tighten. She led him to the control room, where a large screen displayed live security feeds from the Alarian station. Daniel's stomach twisted when he saw what was happening. A group of Alarian soldiers were moving through the halls, their silver armor reflecting the dim lighting. They weren't ordinary guards, they were royal enforcers, and they were heading straight for Celia's chambers. Daniel's blood ran cold. "They're here for her," Rourke said, her tone grim. Without hesitation, Daniel turned and ran. The corridors of the Alarian station were eerily quiet at this hour. Most of the diplomats had retired for the night, unaware of the events unfolding in the shadows. Daniel reached Celia's door just as it slid open. She stepped out, wrapped in a flowing dark blue robe, her glowing markings shifting nervously. "You saw them," she said, her voice steady but tense. Daniel nodded. "They're coming for you." Celia exhaled slowly. "I expected this." His hands clenched at his sides. "Why?" She met his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. "Because I am no longer just the princess of Alaria. I am the first Alarian to bond with a human." Daniel swallowed hard. "And that makes you a threat." "To some, yes," she admitted. "The High Council will not know what to do with this. With us." Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then we need to get out of here. Now." Celia hesitated. "Running will only make it worse. Staying will get you captured," he shot back. For a moment, she studied him, searching his face. Then, finally, she nodded. "There's a hidden passage at the end of this hall. It leads to the docking bay." Daniel didn't waste time asking how she knew that. "Let's move." The halls were empty, but every sound felt too loud, every step too slow. The passage Celia led him to was narrow, dimly lit, and barely used. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, Alarian writing that Daniel didn't understand. "Where does this lead?" he whispered. "To a diplomatic transport ship," Celia replied. "It's unguarded at this hour." Daniel exhaled, relieved. "Good. Then wait." A sharp voice echoed behind them. "Halt." Daniel turned, already reaching for the pulse pistol at his side. 3 Alarian enforcers blocked the passage, their glowing weapons raised. Celia's markings flickered in distress. "We don't have time for this," she murmured. Daniel's grip tightened on his pistol. "We make time." One of the enforcers stepped forward, his silver skin gleaming under the dim light. "Princess Celia," he said, "you must come with us." Celia lifted her chin. "On whose orders?" "The High Council." Her hands curled into fists. "And if I refuse?" The enforcer hesitated. Then we will have to force you. Daniel took a step in front of her, shielding her from them. His voice was cold and sharp. I'd like to see you try. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, Celia moved. She wasn't just royalty. She was trained in Illyrian combat, and it showed. With a swift motion, she struck the nearest enforcer, knocking his weapon aside. Daniel reacted instantly, firing his pulse pistol at the second one. A bright blue burst of energy sent him crashing against the wall. The third enforcer lunged at Celia, but she dodged, spinning gracefully before delivering a precise strike to his chest. He collapsed, groaning. Daniel lowered his pistol, glancing at her in awe. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Celia didn't smile. We need to go. Now. The docking bay was within reach. The transport ship sat in the center of the large hangar, its engines already humming. Celia had activated the launch sequence remotely. They were almost free. But just as they reached the entrance, alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed across the hangar as automated defenses powered up. The station had detected unauthorized departure activity. Daniel cursed. They locked down the bay. Celia moved to the ship's control panel, her fingers flying over the holographic display. I can override it, but it will take time. Daniel turned, pulse pistol raised, scanning the entrance. The enforcers would be here any second. We don't have time, he muttered. Celia's markings flickered in frustration. Almost there. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Daniel gritted his teeth. The enforcers were coming. Then, just as they appeared in the doorway, the ship's engines roared to life. Celia grabbed his hand. Get in. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped inside as the ship's doors sealed shut. A second later, they were airborne, breaking free from the docking bay and shooting into the vastness of space. Daniel exhaled sharply, looking at Celia. We did it. Celia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. No, this is only the beginning. As the stars stretched before them, Daniel knew she was right. They weren't just running. They were hunted. The diplomatic transport shot through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly. Daniel sat in the co-pilot's seat, his hands gripping the armrests as he watched the stars blur outside the window. Beside him, Celia worked quickly at the control panel, her glowing markings flickering with urgency. They had escaped the Illyrian station. For now. But the moment they had launched, alarms had sounded across the entire sector. The High Council wouldn't let them go easily. Daniel exhaled. How long until they track us? Celia's sapphire eyes flickered toward him. They're already tracking us. He clenched his jaw. Figures. Illyrians had advanced technology, far beyond what Earth had. Their ships were faster, their scanners sharper. There was no way they could outrun an entire empire, not for long. Celia tapped a few controls, pulling up a star map. We need a place to hide. Daniel scanned the map. Most of the nearby systems were under Illyrian control. If they landed anywhere within their territory, they'd be captured immediately. Then his eyes landed on a single red-marked area. The Veil Nebula, he muttered. Celia followed his gaze, and her markings flickered with hesitation. That region is unstable. Ion storms make navigation impossible. Which means they won't follow us, Daniel pointed out. She exhaled slowly, considering it. The nebula was dangerous, filled with energy surges that could knock out their systems. But right now, danger was better than capture. Setting a course, she said. The ship shifted as she engaged the hyperdrive, and within seconds, they were hurtling toward the glowing mist of the Veil Nebula. Minutes later, the ship emerged from hyperspace, and the view before them was breathtaking. The nebula was a swirling ocean of blue and purple gas, illuminated by flashes of distant lightning. Stars flickered behind thick clouds, their light distorted by the shifting energy waves. Daniel had seen many wonders in his time as a soldier, but this was something else. Celia, too, seemed momentarily mesmerized. But then, her markings flickered with concern. Shields at 50%. The nebula's energy field is interfering with our systems. Daniel checked the readings. Engines are holding, but we'll need to be careful. Celia nodded, guiding the ship deeper into the swirling clouds. The interference grew stronger, static crackling through their communications. Then, a warning light flashed. Daniel tensed. What is it? Celia's hands flew over the controls. Multiple energy signatures detected. His stomach tightened. They followed us. She shook her head. No, something else is here. Before Daniel could ask what, the ship lurched violently. The control panels flickered, alarms blaring across the cockpit. Celia grabbed the controls. Something is pulling us in. Daniel's eyes widened as he saw the source, a massive gravitational vortex, swirling deep within the nebula. It was an invisible force, but the way the gases curved around it made it clear. If they got too close, they wouldn't escape. Reverse thrusters, he shouted. I'm trying. Celia's fingers moved swiftly, but the ship was still being dragged forward. Daniel unbuckled his harness. I'll check the engine core. Before he could move, a loud boom echoed through the ship. Sparks flew from the control panels. The lights flickered. And then, silence. The ship's engines had gone dark. Daniel and Celia sat frozen, the only sound their ragged breathing. Outside, the nebula swirled ominously. We lost power, Celia murmured. Daniel gritted his teeth. How bad? She ran a quick diagnostic. Backup systems are still active, but propulsion is offline. We're drifting. Daniel cursed under his breath. Can we fix it? Celia hesitated. Possibly. But we need time. Time they didn't have. Because just then, the proximity alarms blared. Daniel's blood turned cold. What now? Celia's markings flared brightly. Another ship. Daniel turned toward the viewport, and his breath caught in his throat. Emerging from the nebula's thick clouds was a massive vessel, its sleek, curved hull unlike anything he had ever seen before. It wasn't Illyrian. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely. The ship's dark exterior shimmered with unknown energy, and Daniel could barely make out its shape through the dense mist. But one thing was clear. They were not alone. The mysterious ship drifted closer, moving with an eerie grace. It was almost too silent, as if it wasn't using normal propulsion systems. Celia's fingers tensed over the controls. I can't identify them. No known Illyrian or human markings. Daniel's instincts screamed at him. Are they scanning us? Before she could answer, the ship flashed with a pulse of golden light. A wave of energy washed over their vessel. And suddenly, the ship's power came back on. Daniel and Celia exchanged a look. Celia checked the readings. Engines are back online. But she hesitated. They did it. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Why? As if in response, a voice crackled through their comms. Deep, unfamiliar, and strangely calm. You are trespassing. State your purpose. Daniel and Celia stared at each other. This was not the High Council. This was something much, much bigger. And whatever they had just stumbled into, it was far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The cockpit was silent except for the hum of the ship's newly restored systems. Daniel and Celia exchanged a tense glance, their minds racing. The mysterious vessel hovered before them, its dark surface shimmering with strange energy. Then, the deep voice spoke again through the comms. You are trespassing. State your purpose. Daniel leaned forward, pressing the communication button. This is Captain Daniel Reeves of the Terran diplomatic cruiser. We mean no harm. A pause. Then the voice replied. Your presence here is not permitted. Explain your intrusion. Celia's glowing markings flickered anxiously. We had no choice, she said, her voice calm but firm. We were escaping an attack. Our ship was damaged, and we needed a place to hide. Silence followed. Then the alien ship moved closer. Daniel tensed, his hand hovering over the control panel, ready to activate shields. A new voice joined the transmission, this one softer, almost curious. Alarian and human, together. Unusual. Celia inhaled sharply. They know who we are. Daniel's mind raced. Who were these beings? How did they recognize an Alarian and a human on sight? Before he could ask, a new command came through the comms. Dock with us. Daniel stiffened. That doesn't sound like a request. Celia nodded slowly. They could have destroyed us already. They didn't. Daniel let out a breath. She was right. These beings clearly had the power to wipe them out. Instead, they had helped by restoring their systems. That meant they wanted something. After a long pause, Daniel reached for the controls. Docking now. The ship's auto-guidance system activated, aligning them with the alien vessel. As they approached, the ship's surface shifted, revealing a docking bay that hadn't been there moments ago. It was as if the ship itself was alive. The docking bay was eerily quiet as Daniel and Celia stepped onto the platform. The air smelled metallic, and the walls pulsed with a faint golden glow. The entire place felt unnatural. Then, the doors ahead of them slid open. 3 figures entered. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with elongated limbs and smooth obsidian-like skin. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were fluid, almost too perfect. They wore no armor, no visible weapons, yet their presence radiated authority. One of them stepped forward. "You are in the territory of the Orin." Daniel exchanged a glance with Celia. The Orin. That name was unfamiliar. The leader tilted its head slightly. "Your presence here is a mistake, but it is an interesting one." Daniel kept his posture steady. "We didn't come here on purpose." The Orin studied them in silence. Then its gaze settled on Celia. "You are bonded." Celia's markings flickered in shock. "How do you know that?" The Orin's voice remained calm. "We can see the threads that connect living beings. Your bond is unique." Daniel frowned. "And that concerns you?" The Orin's gaze didn't waver. "It intrigues us." Celia narrowed her eyes. "Are you allies of the Alarian High Council?" The Orin's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. "The Alarians do not know of us." Daniel exhaled. That was interesting. She checked the readings. Then her expression turned grim. "It's the Alarians." The transmission played across the cockpit. A sharp, commanding voice filled the room. "Fugitive vessel, you are ordered to stand down immediately." The screen flickered, revealing the face of an Alarian officer. His golden markings and rigid posture screamed authority. Celia's face darkened. "Admiral Valon." Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't know much about Alarian politics, but he knew that name. Admiral Valon was ruthless, a high-ranking commander of the Alarian fleet, known for his strict loyalty to the High Council. And now he was after them. Valon's piercing gaze locked onto Celia. "Princess Celia, your betrayal will not be tolerated. You will surrender, and the human will be taken into our custody." Daniel smirked. "Well, that's not happening." Valon's eyes flickered to him. "Your arrogance is noted, human." Celia stepped forward. "Valon, you know what the High Council is doing is wrong. I will not return to them." Valon's face remained emotionless. "You have been misled." Celia shook her head. "No, I see the truth now. The Alarians have ruled through control, through fear. We were meant for more than this." Valon's gaze hardened. "You are confused." Then his voice turned cold. "Lower your shields, or we will open fire." Daniel's heart pounded. He turned to Celia. "We can't fight them head-on." She nodded. "We have to escape." Daniel's fingers flew over the controls, scanning the area. The Veil Nebula's edge was close, but the Alarian warships were closer. Then an idea struck him. It was crazy, but crazy was all they had left. "Celia, what if we go back?" She blinked. "Back where?" He pointed at the screen. "Into the nebula." Her markings flared in surprise. "The ion storms will tear us apart." "Not if we ride the currents," Daniel said. "We don't have to outrun them. We just have to make it impossible for them to follow." Celia hesitated for only a second. Then she nodded. "Do it." Daniel slammed the throttle forward. The ship lurched, engines roaring as they dove back into the swirling clouds of the nebula. Valon's voice crackled over the comms. "Stop them." Red warning lights filled the cockpit. Energy surges rippled through the nebula, lightning flashing dangerously close. The ship shook violently, but Daniel held steady. Celia scanned the pursuit. "They're following us." Daniel smirked. Not for long. He twisted the controls, sending the ship into a tight spiral around a massive energy vortex. The Alarian ships followed, but their bulky designs weren't as agile. Boom! One of the warships lost control, spinning wildly before being swallowed by a plasma storm. Celia's eyes widened. It worked. Daniel grinned. "Hold on, we're not done yet." He maneuvered through the storm, dodging lightning arcs and gravitational distortions. The second Alarian ship struggled, its shields flickering under the nebula's intense pressure. Finally, Daniel spotted their exit. "Brace yourself." With a final push, the ship burst through the nebula's edge, leaving the last Alarian ship trapped inside. Alarms stopped. The silence was deafening. Then Celia let out a breathless laugh. "We did it." Daniel exhaled, his hands finally relaxing on the controls. "Yeah, we did." But his relief was short-lived, because at that moment, the Orin ship reappeared. The massive dark vessel emerged from the mist, hovering silently before them. Celia's expression turned serious. "They were waiting for us." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Why?" A soft chime echoed through the cockpit. "Incoming transmission." Then the familiar deep voice of the Orin spoke once more. "You are not ready." Daniel frowned. "Ready for what?" The Orin did not answer immediately. Then its words sent a chill down his spine. "For what is coming?" A cold silence settled between them. Celia whispered, "What do they know?" Daniel didn't have an answer. But one thing was certain. The Alarians weren't their only problem anymore. Something far worse was coming, and the Orin knew exactly what it was. The Orin vessel hovered in the void, its dark surface shimmering with strange energy. Inside the cockpit, Daniel and Celia exchanged a tense glance. The words of the Orin still echoed in their minds. "You are not ready for what is coming." Daniel tightened his grip on the controls. "They're not attacking." Celia's glowing markings flickered. "They don't need to." A soft chime rang through the ship. "Incoming transmission." Daniel exhaled. "Let's hear them out." He pressed the button, and the deep voice of the Orin filled the cockpit. "You survived the pursuit. Impressive." Daniel leaned forward. "You were watching us." "Yes, we observe all." Celia's eyes narrowed. "Then tell us, what is coming?" A long pause. Then the Orin spoke. "A war, one greater than any the galaxy has ever seen." Daniel's stomach tightened. Between who? The Orin's voice remained calm. Between the old and the new. Between those who control and those who refuse to be controlled. Celia's markings pulsed. "The High Council. They are only the beginning." Daniel frowned. "You're saying there's something bigger than the Alarians?" "Yes." The ship's systems flickered for a brief moment. Then a hologram appeared in front of them, a projection of the galaxy. At its center, a dark void pulsed ominously. Celia's breath caught. "What is that?" The Orin's voice grew heavier. "The unseen." Daniel felt a chill. "What are they?" For the first time, the Orin hesitated. "Ancient, powerful, and awakening." The hologram shifted, showing thousands of glowing red dots spreading across the galaxy. Celia's hands clenched. They're already here. Yes. Daniel's mind raced. The Ilarian High Council had always ruled with fear, but what if they were afraid too? What do they want? He asked. The Orin's answer was simple: to erase weakness. The weight of the words settled over them like a storm. Celia turned to Daniel, her voice urgent. We have to warn someone. Daniel nodded. Earth, the Terran fleet needs to know. But the Orin spoke again. It will not be enough. Daniel frowned. Then what do you suggest? The hologram shifted again, this time showing 3 bright dots. Ilaria, Terra, and us. Celia's eyes widened. You want an alliance. The Orin's voice was calm. It is the only way. Daniel exhaled. The High Council will never agree. Then they will fall first. The Orin's words were not a threat. They were a fact. Celia shook her head. They won't listen to us. They think I'm a traitor. The Orin's voice softened. Then make them listen. Daniel sat back, his mind racing. An alliance between humans, Ilarians, and the Orin. It sounded impossible. But then again, so did everything else that had happened. Celia met Daniel's gaze. If we don't try, we lose everything. He exhaled slowly. Then he nodded. Let's do it. The Orin ship moved away, its dark form disappearing into the void. Celia set the coordinates. We head to Earth first. Daniel activated the engines. And after that, she gave him a small smile. We change the galaxy. The ship surged forward, leaving behind the unknown, and heading straight into the fight for the future.